Testing, testing.
Well, it's true. That's true. That's true. Okay, I'll come up. Tired. Come on, G-PACT. Come on. Oh. That is awesome.
Nothing like having a
Yes. Yes.
Please.
My brother-in-law does it.
I don't think I need this. I think we can do away with it. I'd like to welcome everybody to. It's been I know, tough night with the weather in New York City at this point, and there's a little thing called the Iowa Caucus going on this evening. But I would like to welcome everybody, both our audience members and our distinguished panelists this evening for G-PACT's first of what will hopefully be more annual FDA reform roundtables. In the audience in particular, I'll get to welcoming our roundtable guests. I'd like to most particularly welcome our president, Chris Hastings, who joins us from Harrisburg, along with fellow board members Jim Sliney and Tina Luzis, and also particularly want to welcome John Morrissey, who was kind enough to join us this evening. John is from the Schultze Family Foundation. The Schultze family helps found, or perhaps founded themselves, Best Buy, basically. And John has done terrific work in terms of raising research and awareness for juvenile diabetes, something that the G-PACT family is remarkably well aware of given the nature of our community at this point. Also want to welcome our fellow guests here tonight. Given the nature of the crowd and the discussion, we're going to keep things informal. Certainly, if anybody has any questions or answers, we'd be happy to answer them. I guess just to introduce, it's no accident. As a 501c3, we are generally not permitted to take a position in terms of the political role, but what we are permitted to do is to present issues that are of public importance and relevance at this point. And G-PACT, I know both Carissa and myself have been battling against and for digestive tract paralysis over the course of close to 30 years now. At this point, G-PACT represents the single largest pool of individuals who suffer from digestive tract paralysis in the United States. I was talking with Nicole earlier this evening. We have about 11,000 members nationwide, and we represent a community of about 5 million individuals at this point who not only suffer from gut paralysis as a primary condition, but who also deal with Parkinson's disease, lupus, scleroderma, cancer, and spinal cord paralysis, basically. And when you consider at this point that these conditions perhaps represent the single largest form of starvation occurring in the United States currently, it certainly focuses your attention at this point on the need to get relevant treatments available and up and running in the United States at this point. G-PACT for close to a decade now has been involved in active conversations with the Food and Drug Administration at this point. We were lucky enough to see that those conversations led to a dialogue with the FDA back in May of this year. Carissa was one of the witnesses during that process, and we'd be happy to email anybody who is interested a transcript of those hearings. But the end result of those hearings was that the FDA, who we were trying to get for nearly a decade to recognize this, recognized that there was a tremendous unmet need in order to bring about treatments for gut paralysis that really don't remain present within the United States at this point. I would just present as a single condition, G-PACT has been trying hard to stabilize the availability in the market for a family of medications known as digestive prokinetics. These are medicines that reset the electrical rhythm of the gut and put it on a more stable footing. Without these drugs, many of our patients either end up on artificial nutrition or face gut transplant. Carissa herself was a survivor of a quintuple organ transplant at the University of Pittsburgh. UPMC has done a terrific job with that, and we're currently efforting to build up a more cooperative relationship with New York Presbyterian on that note. But I would just say, and Nicole pointed out earlier in our conversations, gut paralysis is one of about 6,500 chronic illnesses in the United States that remain without a treatment solution in the United States. And there you're talking about probably on the order of 30 or 40 million Americans who sort of fight through their day with a variety of conditions at this point, for which treatment options simply remain unavailable. And I think in one of the issues we'll discuss, some of those options do exist outside of the United States in places like the European Union, Canada, and Japan. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce some of our fellow panel members. Krista Rappaport, who's going to help me moderate this evening, is an attorney for Goldwater and works closely with Mary Goldwater II, who some of you might know is the son of the former U.S. presidential candidate Mary Goldwater. I've had the privilege of working with Krista in my former job over at an insurance company that shall not be named this evening at this point, but she's a terrific attorney, and it's been a pleasure learning from her. Darcy Olsen, who I had the privilege of first meeting earlier today, is the president of the Goldwater Institute and has authored a remarkable book called The Right to Try, basically a state-based effort which sees some of the difficulty we've been facing in terms of the FDA reform, and has sort of asked the question, flipped around the question and says that are there more creative alternatives we might be able to introduce to what we currently face today. Nicole Gray, who's kind enough to join us as a reporter for Biopharma Dive, one of the leading trade publications having to do with pharmaceutical research at this point. Her writings are everywhere in the trades and are quite well known. Dr. Robert Goldberg, along with some of his colleagues at the Center for Medicine and Public Interest, has made his life work to study some of the economic issues we face without proper treatments in this area. And last but not least, gentleman who I've had correspondence with for about 10 years or so, Dr. Paul Howard from the Manhattan Institute, who leads their remarkable efforts with Project FDA in cooperation with, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Howard, Andy von Eschenbach, former FDA commissioner, and also former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn, and has been able, Manhattan Institute is a fairly neutral think tank in the city who also engages in creative solutions, creative efforts in terms of why should we continue to be satisfied with taking 15 years to research a medication or spending $1 billion in order to get up and running. Figure I'd open the floor up to Krista, but for starters, it seems that the 2015 election has thrown an interesting little monkey wrench into our discussions with the President Obama had attempted to nominate Dr. Khalif from Duke University as the new FDA commissioner, and it appears that efforts have been made on a bipartisan basis to sort of delay that nomination. I want to open up the floor to our participants to see how that might serve to delay some of the efforts we're working on at this point.
Well, I'm glad everyone could come, and I think we decided that this should be informal. We're going to we welcome all participation from the audience, and I think just so that everyone has an understanding that we level set, I would like Darcy and others to talk about the Right to Try initiatives. This is being filmed, and we hope that it's educational for those people on YouTube who can learn from this.
Well, sure, I'll just take a few minutes, and like Krista said, we really want to make it interactive since we're a small group tonight, and hopefully we can answer any questions that you might have come in with. But I appreciate very much, Michael, that introduction, and Carissa, your work for being here after all you've been through to help patients. The patient advocacy groups are critical to getting reform in Washington, and they've also been absolutely instrumental in passing the Right to Try across the country. So that's what my expertise is really in, not so much FDA reform, but really how can we work around an FDA that doesn't seem too eager to reform itself when people are dying. The Right to Try is a state-based movement. We have passed this legislation now in 24 states in less than 2 years. And what it does is it says that if you're a patient with a terminal condition and you've exhausted the conventional treatments and they're not working for you, and your doctor wants to give you something that is in the investigational process of phase 1, phase 2, or 3 of the FDA, and the manufacturer agrees that you can take that. In other words, it gives you access to research, to medicines that are in that pipeline, but maybe 10 years away from ultimate approval. The biggest criticism of the Right to Try so far is that people have said, well, nobody will use it. That actually is not true. We know of people using it, but we are also a law firm, and so people are doctors and patients come to us to make sure that their rights will be protected. How do we access this law? How do we use this law? How do we make sure we don't, how do we make sure we're staying in compliance with the law? And so at this point, nobody has given us permission to use their names and to tell you where they are. But you can bet your bottom dollar that if you know someone who is terminal, and I'm sure we all have and do, people with these illnesses are going to be looking for ways to get treatments, and they will use the right to try laws to try to get those treatments. We love this law. We think this is a great way to help people not feel like they have to go to to Mexico to try some untested therapy. That when there is something promising, we hope it will give people access to that. We also realize that it doesn't go far enough. Not everything is, not all diseases that are difficult on folks are necessarily terminal. So there's more to be done, but this is a first step and a very important step. So I've got a whole book on it. I could talk for ages on it, but just to give you that quick rundown, and I'll be glad to answer any questions when it's the right time.
I was just saying one thing. The title is a little bit glib, anti-FDA. It's not that. I've been a regulatory attorney for over 20 some odd years, and similar to coaching a team or other things, I think that unfettered industries, especially those with a public interest, is not always a good thing. But there's some rationality that appears to be missing from time to time, and too much level of bureaucracy to the detriment of patients. So this is really, that is the spirit in which it's intended. Like, FDA, please wake up. Please help us, because there are so many people who need the help.
So I have a question for you. So is this the same thing as the Compassionate Use Act? Is it comparable?
So that's a great question. So there is a federal compassionate use program, and the idea, it's a similar idea that folks with terminal illnesses who've kind of reached the end of the line with the current approved drugs can go to the FDA and get permission to take something. Of course, the problem with that is less than 1% of patients ever get access to those drugs through compassionate use, even though the FDA insists that the program is working. What this does is this just cuts, this changes everything by changing the timeliness. If the doctor says you need it and the manufacturer says okay, you go. And of course with terminal illnesses, time is of the essence.
And
So
I would just add, many of our board members here this evening have either attempted to or have participated in the emergency individual directive protocols that FDA has had for some of our drugs, and I can tell you from experience a couple of thoughts. First of all, the reliability of the programs. It's one thing to say, we need these medicines for 5 minutes or for a couple months. Our patients presumably are going to be on these medicines in here and now for the rest of their lives, potentially decades. And the programs, given the hoops that we have to jump through over that long period of time, simply are not sustainable enough, simply are not reliable enough that, to Darcy's point, even if you're lucky enough to be that 1% who have jumped through all these hoops, which takes many months to clear, how do you know 2 months you renew these INDs on a bi-monthly basis? How do you know you can jump through these hoops? And the doctors who agree to participate in these protocols are essentially put through the ringer, basically. They have to repeatedly participate through IRB, institutional review board processes, and they face certain liability hurdles that their medical centers may put a gun to their heads and say, you gotta be kidding me, we're not agreeing to this. And it presents, and I'm curious about Paul's thoughts on this, when the FDA becomes a pharmacist in front of 300 million people, basically, it's an interesting difficulty we have here at this point, where if we could somehow winnow it down to a lower level, either multiple IRBs or through some sort of smaller effort here at this point, our doctors generally just simply don't clear those hurdles, and our patients are left without medication with some fairly rough choices at times.
Well, the original effort here, of course, we all know, is the AIDS battle against AIDS, the AIDS community. The AIDS community really went to the streets and in some cases chained themselves to desks and demanded, in the face of the fact that there were no available therapies at that time, in the early 1990s, that slowed the progression of the disease and certainly didn't extend life. They said we were willing to take these risks, and the FDA and other agencies really responded to that. So And there have been, there have been gains in cancer in other places. I think the reality of it is that the patient community really does have to be very vocal and leading the way. And that one of the things that's really changed the game, I think, over the last few years has been the rise of social media and Facebook and Twitter and all of these ways that patients now can take their voices right to the people, right to change.org, and make their case in a way that they didn't necessarily have before unless they were a very large, very vocal, very active patient community. So I think that is changing the calculus, and I think that the science is changing the calculus. Bob can talk about this well, about the rise of the N-of-1 trial, the N-of-1 patients, increasingly we're understanding that you go back and look at these cancer trials. When the National Cancer Institute launched an exceptional responders initiative, where years ago a patient had been treated with off-label kidney cancer drug for, say, bladder cancer, and only one patient might have responded when the drug was shelved because they thought it didn't work. But now we have the tools at our disposal, from genomic point of view, proteomics, and all these other tools to understand why that particular patient responded and move things through the clinic very quickly.
10 years ago, when I was just a lad, I was at the Manhattan Institute.
I still have it.
And I still haven't gone through my growth spurt yet. We were sitting at a meeting with the FDA task force, and Josh Letterberg was there, and we had people from Merck and Pfizer. This was in 2004, and they looked at their BlackBerries, because everyone had BlackBerries then. Some people still do. Losers. I mean, and they jumped out of their chair, and it was Merck had pulled Vioxx off of the market. Now, it's interesting that here we are 10 years later, we're talking about the same things that we talked about in 2004. And it has nothing to do with, the science is incredible. I can later talk about just how incredible and pinpoint it is. But the AIDS activists, AIDS community had none of this. They didn't have big data. They had mimeograph machines and index cards where they were sharing stuff through snail mail, and they managed to get drugs approved after phase 1. So we, as much as it's, and there is an inherent institutionalized culture of against the null hypothesis in the FDA, that you know what, but we get the kind of FDA we deserve. And to Paul's point, the way to change things, right to try has been a real wake-up call for a lot of people. I think a lot of people, the traditional elites, were poo-pooing it, saying, oh, there's no dosing in this. Well, guess what? We have 24 states later, and more to come. And it reflects the fact that we together, not disease, but as groups, it's our data. We're the ones investing blood, sweat, and tears in the clinical trials of stuff, and we now have the tools to accelerate the cycle of development. It should not take 10 years. It should take 2 years, 3 years. John at some point I'm sure will jump in, because John and I met. He has a program to basically reduce. Why should it take 10 years to get a drug to market when we have the ability to do it in 2 weeks?
10 days.
10 days, when we know at point of care you can see the tumor regressing, or you can see the inflammation receding. Why can't, and one of the things that, since you guys already de-identified, capturing that data and laying it at the feet of the FDA or companies would be remarkable, because I bet in 90% of the cases, the drugs that are used on a compassionate use basis go on to become standard of care. Let me repeat that. 90% of the drugs that are used on a compassionate use basis wind up becoming standard of care. And it's not because, and so we just need to speed that process a lot faster.
And Bob, to your point, actually I had personal evidence of this. In 2005, I was in New York Hospital for about a 3-week period of time, and I was placed on a medication which at that time was available called Zelnorm. I was about a step away from total parenteral nutrition at that point in time. And within literally a couple of weeks, I was able to avoid IV nutrition, rapidly gained back the weight that I had lost, basically at that point, and stabilized. Later on, researchers at Columbia University doing work had discovered that Zelnorm, which stimulates and modulates the release of the neurotransmitter serotonin in the gut, may very well have the capability of reminding your body's own autologous stem cells
Yeah.
that guys, it's time to regenerate nerve and muscle
Yeah.
tissue in their digestive tract. Unfortunately, in March of 2007, through a decision that we were pretty shocked by, FDA, without notice and opportunity to be heard, turned around and said, we're pulling Zelnorm. We
Yeah.
had
I remember that.
made a metadata group of, I believe it was 7 or 10 studies of 29,000 patients, about 0.1% had chest pain while on the drug. We're pulling the drug from the U.S., stuff nuggies. And John, I don't know if you remember, but John LePook, who's a
Sure.
GI at NYU, we tried to get him this evening, we were unsuccessful, but he still continues to be CVS's medical
Yes.
correspondent. He personally had a number of patients on the drug, and he asked the FDA at a press conference, said, guys, what are you going to have a hearing about this? And they said, well, we get around to it. And it's 2016, and they haven't gotten around to it. And that was a major loss for our patients.
Let me just make another point. The randomized clinical trial system, which considered the gold standard, is broken. It is broken beyond belief. We are now in an era of combination therapies. We're developing strategies, not single solutions. It is broken, no less than someone than Lee Hood, who invented the field of biotechnology and sequencing, said it's broken. I'm working with Lee and some other people. We can take a deep dive of somebody's blood and match what's going on at the genomic level, proteomic level, microbiome, clinical, and match people to other patients to find out what's similar and what's not unique, and then use that to tailor the treatments to the person, not the other way around. That's what I say, N of 1. It's really, everybody is their own clinical trial. And that's really what Right to Try really is. It's the political expression of single person trials.
Can I ask you a question to follow up on that? So N equals 1, that's your sample size. When you say that the kind of gold standard randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial, the thing that covered in peer-reviewed publications is you're basically saying that it's outdated, that it's anachronistic relative to the technologies and capabilities that we have to expedite this process. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but John, you want to give them an example of the Televac trial?
Sure.
John and I we're not husband and wife, but we're joined.
Bob and I are soul brothers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have to tell you, saying hello to me, asking me to say something, like take a sip of water out of Niagara Falls. This whole subject is such a target-rich environment, and as much as I applaud everything to do Right to Try, it's not enough.
Can I say one thing before? John not only is with the Schultz Foundation, John worked for George Schultz to deregulate the airline and trucking
The
industries.
ICC no longer exists.
Yeah.
I was told to modify it, it's gone. It was a target-rich environment, and there's so many stupidities in it that it's hard to know where to start. So I want to just make a couple of quick examples, okay? Randomized clinical trials. There are only 2 outcomes possible. Successful, it's unsuccessful. I'm not sure which is worse. Okay, if you're a randomized clinical trial for some deadly disease, for example, we use this because the impact is great. And you find that you've got a brain tumor that was 12 months ordinary life, and now you do the randomized clinical trials for 10 years and you get 24 months. That's tragic. 12 more months of life? The 30,000 people a year who would die in 12 months, and you sat there and didn't tell anybody? It's like driving past somebody in Alaska whose car is busted, it's 20 degrees below zero, and you wave them as you go by. For God's sake, stop. Get them in the car. So that's what you get out of successful trials. The more successful a trial is, the worse ethics and morality lie in a trial, the poorer the science is. It's crap. Clinical sciences, clinical trials 2 and 3 are absolute crap. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Let's take the other case. There's only 2 outcomes. It's either very good, it passes, or it fails. Well, I'll give you a Televac trial. Because the reason
That's what I wanted to do.
my wife was in the Abraxane, could not get any Abraxane trial, which turned out to be successful. I was turned down. I asked for it, was turned down. We get in a Televac trial. By the way you get compassionate care, don't tell the hospital or doctor they're in it until the trial arrives. The Mayo people were stunned one morning to find out that they had a Wadding Field was some cryogenically controlled televac trial from the United Kingdom, an immunotherapeutic drug. And they called me and said, Mr. Morrissey, where did this stuff come from? I said, it's my wife's trial. They said, how did she get in the trial? We didn't approve it. I said, you didn't have to. I took care of all the arrangements. Just give it to her. We'll be down tomorrow. That was the first clinical trial they'd ever done for compassionate care. So let's take the televac trial. Televac trial was based on some very interesting ideas. The idea that the telomeres at the end of the DNA molecule, that when they shortened, they were signaling the end of life. And in the case of tumors, they don't shorten. So what they thought is if they could make a vaccine against those tumors, against the telomeres, it would force the telomeres to shorten and the tumors would die. It turned out that the original trials were done in 2001 or 2003. It was published in the Journal of Physical Sciences in England, and they had very good results. It was an extremely well done trial. I got my wife in that trial. Okay. There was 1,651 patients, 1,650 in the United Kingdom, one outside the United Kingdom, which was my wife. Okay. Now, I know that a lot of those people who've been in that trial, the original plan was 2,500. It was to involve 150 of the best medical centers in all of the United Kingdom, all the best scientists, all the best. And in 2014, they announced the trial was being stopped with only 1,051 people. Again, one, my wife, because it was a failure. And a year later, they come out with the report in The Lancet, and said it was a failure. It wasn't a failure. I know, because I was looking at some of those data when they were coming in. There were a lot of people who did very well in that trial. But what happened to their televac trial? We spent 10 years tied up the best British research, which is pretty damn good stuff. Thousands of medical personnel, all to go on this trial. At the end of the 10 years, that was all wasted. God knows what it cost, 100 million. Every major scientist who was involved in tumor was involved in that. So, let's say, suppose we didn't have, and let me go through one more. So why are we getting these phase 2 and 3 trials? So you're an investigative scientist at the University of Minnesota, and you got the mice are looking pretty good. You put something in the mice, and it's like looking under the street light when you lost the money in the dark. That's okay. The mice are all we've got, so we got to stick with them. And it looks pretty good. So you go to Bosch, you say, I want a phase 2 and 3 trial. And he said, what's it going to cost? Well, 50 million, maybe 100 million. What's the percentage of cancer trials that accepted after 5%? Okay. So, well, suppose we fail. I don't want you failing. So, okay, we go back to phase 1 trial. I had 12 people. All of them did pretty well. They were all blonde-haired Norwegian, 39 years old. That's all I want in phase 2 and 3. The last thing I want to find out is anything new. That's the whole point of trials. How are we going to cure cancer when all we're doing is finding out the same thing we knew 10 years ago? Everything that came out of that televac trial was in the 2003 Journal of Medical Physics. Nothing came out of it. 1,051 patients, 160 medical centers, God knows how many. So, which trial was a bigger disaster? Now let me ask you the question I always ask the medical school guys, the two guys that teach clinical trials at the University of Minnesota, Dave Lagerspot and Dave Potter. They didn't like my idea. Say, okay, 95% of the trials fail. Suppose at the end of phase 1 trial, I said, I'm going to take anybody who wants this drug, this disease. I've got it, it does no harm. Pancreatic cancer, brain cancer. Now, let me take a better one, ovarian, because I know the numbers on this very well, because Canary Foundation is doing that, right? So, it took them 5 years to get 1,500 patients. Now, most adult women get physical checkups once a year. All they're looking for is early markers, okay? CA84 is good, but it's not complete. So, if you, and it cost them $15 million to get 1,100 patients. And out of the 1,100 patients, given the incidence of ovarian cancer, with luck we'll get one woman who's going to show up with ovarian cancer early. Let me have every woman that goes in for a medical checkup each year, get that blood sample, and we'll look for the markers, we'll take them all, and see which ones show. I can give you the 1,500 people in that trial by Friday. And so when I asked these two guys, Dave Potter and Dave Lagerspot, who are brilliant PhDs in cellular biology, if I went for a job there, I'd be lucky if I could wash the test tubes. These guys are so smart, and I know it. I said, suppose we let 6 months go by, and I get everybody who shows up in the United States who wants this drug, whether it's pancreatic or brain tumor or something else. and I take all the data. At the end of 6 months, normally I'd have 75 people in a trial after 6 months. I've got 5,000, 10,000. And now I let you look through the very data you're going to look for. Look for the tumors you thought you were going to cure. I'll let you stratify that data with big data. I'll just pick out the ones that match your criteria. Now, how many times what's the failure rate there? It's 0. How do you lose the lottery when they give you the numbers in advance? You win the lottery every damn time. So what happens to the cost of these trials? Instead of paying $50 and $100 million, I'll go one more just so Bob knows. I just did, for years I was saying if we get rid of the damn phase 2 and 3, the prices will come down. And the question came to me, how much? I don't know. So I did the analysis last summer. And I'll just give you the end of the facts. And the end, this is the end of the sip of water you're getting out of my own phone. But if you get rid of phase 2 and 3 trials, and after phase 1 you say this medicine's okay. For a disease with like bile duct cancer or esophageal, maybe 1,000 people a year. In order to get a 30% return on investment, anybody's going into that. And that's 30% is not a big high hurdle rate. That's typical for industrial companies. You would have to charge over $1 million for each year's treatment. If I do it after 10 days, I can charge $270. That's the impact. That's the bracket. When I wanted to see what this forcing function, I couldn't believe it was that bad. We ran a whole series of trials, and what you get to is net present value. Okay, and that's interesting because all these brilliant PhD guys, and I said to them, to Dave Potter, I said, Dave, what's the net present value? Like I spotted Doug Yee, who's the director of Masonic Cancer Center. What's net present value? Well, nobody in business would do it. You wouldn't buy a cup of coffee without net present value. And what happens to you when you've got 10 years in trial, the net present value of every buck that you spend on year 1 is enormous, and year 2 and year 3. And at the end of 10 years, then you start getting back, it's this much. The net present value in year 20 is 0.01 when you start getting something back. So what do you have to charge? How many dollars do you have to charge times 0.01 to get even a reasonable return on investment for this stuff?
So sorry to interrupt to your point on some of the criticism that's come out, and obviously there may be issues in other areas, but like Mr. Scarelli and some of his medicines that he was supporting, part of the cost, to your point, is coming in.
All of it. All of it. You can give away the rest of it. The rest of it is crap. You know, the production cost of this stuff, I take ICT 107. Okay. John Yu is a terrific guy, scientist. I'm particularly interested in brain tumor because I lost my daughter to that after, by the way, 6 compassionate care trials. But she got it. Nobody else had had it. She was the first one ever to get anti-PD-1 for brain tumor. Look, not everybody else knows how that happens, but I get it. So you go out and you look at John Yu, and John Yu it's hard to find the cost data, but John had to make a presentation at JP Morgan once about 10 years ago. What did it cost him to make ICT 107? So we had to tell him. And he said at that time, he said, I'm going to charge $10,000, and it cost me $3,000 to make. So he couldn't get any back. So then he said, I'm going to charge $100,000. He got a couple of guys to invest. So the cost of manufacturing is trivial. You can give it away. The whole cost comes in net present value, and the other one is expected value. If you only get 5% pass on phase 2 and 3 trials, then the 5% that pass have got to carry the cost of the 95% that fail. That's called expected value. Now, I had dinner with the former chairman of the board of Pacific Telesis and the chairman of the board of Chevron out in California the first week in December. And one of them was one of my best buddies, and he was telling the other people at the table, John's just done this analysis. And they all got all excited. They said, man, somebody don't know about net present value. I said, nobody. They haven't got a clue. He's a brilliant biologist. And he said, the guy who was Dave O'Reilly's chairman of the board of Chevron, he said, we couldn't do anything without expected value. How do you do it? So we're completely innumerate. These guys are brilliant, but they're innumerate. They don't understand the cost of it. And they just did a 2-year study in the Senate, and they came out with the idea, so well, the production cost is, production cost is nothing. What costs you is the 10-year delay. So what's the ethics of the boat's going down, and you can't swim? You say, can I use that life preserver? And they say, the Coast Guard hasn't approved that yet. So I'll stop now, because I can talk about this a lot longer than you want.
Well, going to John's point, I remember the Manhattan Institute came out with some studies fairly recently over the past couple of years that sort of averaged out, so for those of you that are not familiar, all medications go through review at FDA CDER, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, basically. And the way it's currently structured at this point, we divide things up by disease group, which is divided up essentially by organ system. So GI drugs go through the Digestive Advisory Committee, brain drugs go through the neurologic group, cancer is probably the only disease, or maybe AIDS is too, where it's sectioned out by disease group with the oncology group with Dr. Podzer has become much prominent in the area. And I think you could better speak with this, but you guys did a study where you averaged out per year how many medications are currently getting reviewed by each of these CDER officers. And I think
Right, if you look at the FDA's divisions, and we found that the Division of Oncology surprisingly was the best at moving through the pipeline. Doesn't mean they're perfect, but they're certainly the most efficient given the level of resources. And if you talk to the companies, I mean, everything you just said is true. They at least compared to their colleagues in other divisions are willing to take more risks. But I think the message there, the takeaway from our report was also the value of the therapies to patients, to the U.S. economy is just staggering. There was a study by a couple of University of Chicago economists a few years ago that said a 1% decline in cancer mortality is worth about $500 billion. And the 500 billion, right. So a 1-year advance of a single generation of FDA therapies, our economists looked at this, Alex Tabarrok and some colleagues from Tufts, said advancing one generation, so let's say 25 to 30 drugs, $4 trillion in value.
I mean, just think about the fact that even if you delayed the onset of gastroparesis or any autoimmune disease by 5 years, what the impact would be. What if you could reduce the number of organ transplants that you would need by 10%? And you know, I think I think we're all in agreement here that we need to do this. I'm sort of chopping at the bit because it's been 10 years and counting, and I've been through 2 iterations of FDA reform. One under when Newt became speaker, and then one after the Vioxx thing, and then now, you know, things change, and now the FDA is into patient-centered drug development, which I thought, well, wait a minute, I mean, isn't that what it's supposed to be about to begin with, right? I mean, so,
I have a question for you.
yeah.
When we talk about the FDA's willingness to assume risk, you know, you have all these individual groups approving drugs. Is there any arbitrary and capricious standard or some kind of standard to measure?
Yes. Yes, I mean, our mutual colleague Scott Gottlieb, who was deputy commissioner, talks about the statistical, the unending hunger for statistical certainty. So even though the size of the trials may be smaller, the amount of data that you want per person is incredible and pointless. I mean, we worship at the altar of p-value, and anyone who has done statistics knows that, you know, that the p-value is supposed to establish statistical significance. But I was talking to John on the way home. Statistical significance does not mean clinical significance. Let me give you an example. So the average survival is used as the endpoint in cancer. Average survival means nothing when you've got if you have 5 people with breast cancer, they'll have 10 different mutations in 20 different epigenetic signatures, not including the expression, the signaling between cell to cell, which isn't genetic. Now, so that's one thing. The second thing is, once you get an advanced form of disease, it seems increasingly that the residual disease cells are more resilient. They're more like, it's like carpet bombing, and whoever is left alive is going to be that much more resilient. So to measure survival of 2 people that are diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer, you could have one person with many more resilient cells than the other. We can now differentiate between that. So that renders statistical significance insignificant, if you will. So the FDA has made some adjustments. They've been using Bayesian analysis. Bayesian basically means, you know, it's like the old joke, you know, 2 guys are on the top of the Empire State Building, and one says to the other, well, what if I jumped off the Empire State Building and I survived? I said, well, that would be really lucky. I said, well, what if I did it again? I said, that'd be luck too. I said, what if I did it again? I said, well, that would be a habit. So, and really after a while, you know, if something happens again and again, you can pretty much bet that it's going to happen. But the FDA uses randomized trials. And again, the senior leadership is much more evolved on this than the people in the division, but the reviewers are scared to death. They recruit, it is really the only way to change it is twofold. One is doing what Darcy's doing, the other is for patient groups to just say, well, you know, okay, you can do it your way, we'll do it our way, and then we'll see. Are they going to arrest 11,000 people of your organization? I don't think so.
Bob said something earlier when you have the FDA that we deserve. I think it comes down to the consumer of a product who is not facing a life-threatening disease. And you know, that community of trial lawyers, all those people are standing up there and saying, well, we don't accept that marginal risk. And so, you know, they give out Francis Kelsey Award at the FDA based on something that didn't happen. So, you know, you really have to understand that there is a community out there that use their, I mean, they're healthy people who have zero risk tolerance, and that's understandable because they're healthy. But we need an agency and an FDA that respects the needs of the patient community and people who do not have good options.
Yeah, and so you know, the other part of that is that, and again, this is where right to try it comes in, is that the FDA is only part of the problem. I mean, you have, you know, Kathleen, I think it was, I'm trying to think who it was on I was on the plane with, but I was talking to one of the leading cancer researchers in the world. Randomized trials is the only way to go. We have to randomize people to placebo. We're not going to know. And people in industry are also hidebound. It's a very, very...
They're scared.
They're scared. I mean, read Vince DeVita's book, The Death of Cancer.
I'm reading that right
You know,
now.
it is, if you want to see how they react to renegades in the field, I mean, forget it. You're on, you know, if you were doing chemotherapy, you were considered to be a butcher.
In 1963.
In 1963.
Yeah.
And the same thing, you know, now I just came back from a cancer institute in South Dakota, which is genomic sequencing everybody's genome, everyone's exome, everyone's proteome, and then they're doing combinations of treatments, and one woman who's part of the trial, she's Roselle Kurzrock, very distinguished breast cancer, did more phase 1 trials of breast cancer than anyone else, and pancreatic cancer. She's getting double survival rates with her pancreatic cancer combo. She has people in her department telling their patients not to go to this crazy woman. So part of what we have to do is, there's a lot of moving parts, but at least now we have the parts to move. So the FDA will move if they're forced to move, as will Congress. But you're going to get a lot of pushback from the very people that you think...
Have you guys heard about
I would tell you that the two shocks in our patient community, the long-term shock has been, you know, that talked to Dr. Howard about this story. The group Public Citizen, which has been founded by Ralph Nader, always, I don't think they even know we're up against them, but I know we're up against them. So Public Citizen, the Consumer Federation effort, has a subgroup called Health Research Group. And for many years, we have found that our medications have been attacked by this group. They said Wolf, now Michael Carone at this point, and we can never find within that group anyone who's a gastroenterologist, anyone who's a cardiologist, yet they attack all of our medicines on that basis. They generally sit within the leadership of the drug safety group at the FDA. There was a recent hearing on one of our drugs, domperidone, that Mike Carone sat on. And to give you an example, the chief side effect that FDA is a bit averse to, which you guys may be familiar with, something called long QT syndrome, a cardiovascular issue, where I believe if I'm appropriately pointing out the tips of your EKG rhythm or distance here at this point. And in this recent hearing, they brought out a hypothetical slide, not hypothetical, real slide, saying, there are 100 medications that are currently available in the United States, including erythromycin and levaquin, that have the same exact side effect at this point. And despite this, this was an effort to see if domperidone could be compounded in the United States, because domperidone obviously is off patent now at this point. And of the 19 drugs that were voted on, it was the closest vote of any of them. It lost 7-3. and one of the participants in the roundtable was the head of GI at UCLA, and she said, very succinctly, guys, the Hippocratic oath may be about first doing no harm, but that doesn't mean that it's first do nothing at this point. And that's
So
what we've been
what's
faced
in
with.
development? You said digestive prokinetics.
It's-
Is there anything close?
So for example, and this goes
Which drugs do you want?
this goes to something like the Result Act, for example, that we should talk a little bit about. There are multiple targets that are available, have been available for up to 5 or 6 years overseas. Drugs such as Mosapride, which has been available for years in Japan. Procalipride, which some of the top researchers in the U.S. have worked on for Shire Pharmaceuticals at this point, that have been available, that have been subjected to clinical trials for about 5 or 6 years.
Can I suggest a topic for you guys? Because I went through this, George Schultz, the ICC was killing us with high prices, and Schultz said, get over here and slow down. I got rid of it. But I made a very big mistake, and I was young, and I was young at one time. And, I didn't know any better, and I didn't recognize that there was a lot of people who were, their major concern was, I've been doing this 30 years, what do I do the rest of my life? How am I going to make a living? I did not, and that question came up frequently, and I said, look, that's individuals, and I was very obtuse and careless on that. I would have made my job twice as easy if I could figure out some really productive use for these guys. And I think with the FDA, when I think about the FDA, I think that eventually one way to get them on the right side is so many of them now are doing totally unproductive things. And there's almost no post-marketing follow. The amount of people that do post-marketing. And if you get rid of phase 2 and 3, everything's post-marketing. So that's it. You'll get these guys who are very qualified, very smart guys, you'll get real careers for change instead of going in and punching clock. I think there's a real opportunity for people like you to make a change with the FDA.
Although I would say, unfortunately, with the class of meds we deal with, at least some of the harm has come in the phase 4 post-marketing. Zelnorm, for example, was pulled by some of those post-marketing reviewers in phase 4.
Provenge was pulled, they don't have a single immunologist on the panel. 12 guys, not one immunologist they can find in immunotherapy. What I'm saying is if you soften it a little bit, you gotta recognize, and that's, you read the book, we've all read DeVita's book.
Yeah,
And what happened when he found a cure named Buddha? Because
exactly.
they thought their
Yeah.
practices were going to be.
I want to ask you a quick question.
It's your turn to call.
DMD, Sarepta and Biomarin. Has anyone been following that, and why did that fail so miserably? Why didn't either drug it?
I can actually put you in touch with John tonight if you want.
That would be great. Because
And
we've been covering that and we can't get an answer.
I'll give you, we're good.
Thanks. Okay, I'm gonna get your.
So I guess to the book, a suggestion that's come before
Her two boys.
I've been writing about DMD obsessively.
A suggestion that's come before Congress on this issue, Senator Cruz, who I know will inspire a few tomatoes or pies here at this point, depending on who I'm speaking with, and Senator Mike Lee in Utah recently introduced an act called the Result Act at this point that's gained prominence in our community. And what the Result Act is meant to do, it doesn't help us with medications which have been attempted in the U.S. and failed, like Zelnorm, Pitulsin, Valperidone, but what does help us with the Procaliprides and the Mosaprides in the world. Drugs that have never been brought up for review before cedar digestive disease at this point, but are readily available. You could walk into Boots Pharmacy in the United Kingdom, and with the appropriate prescription, you're coming out of there with Procalipride at this point. And their point is, and you see it some in the insurance industry too, to try and get best of brand here at this point. The medication is available in what we would consider from other first world regulatory agencies like EMA from the European Union, or Japan, or Canada. Then it should be immediately considered to be available and approved within the United States. It's been already subjected through the 10 to 15 year 3-phase process of review at this point through their equivalents and other perfectly acceptable agencies. It's not as if people in Europe and Japan have 2 stomachs, 3 years,
How do you
4
respond
eyeballs.
to the pushback? You know what the pushback is to Cruz's suggestion, right? Like that every regulatory agency has different protocols, and I'm not saying I agree. I'm just like devil's advocate here. I mean, the pushback is very, very.
Well, our mutual friend Jim Pinkerton wrote a response to my friend Ed Silverman's colleague, and it's very easy. You know, there is this move to harmonize regulations. So all Cruz is doing is basically moving in the direction that the FDA is already moving towards. I mean, the second thing is that, you know, you mentioned Sid Wolf and Public Citizen. So I have a book on my shelf from 1974 called the Regulation of Drug Development. And in the book, you know, Sid Wolf is quoted as saying that that class of diabetes drugs at the time were unsafe. So Google's a wonderful thing, so I did Sid Wolf 1980s diabetes, same thing. These drugs are unsafe. 1990s, these drugs are unsafe. So by Sid Wolf's definition, not one diabetes drug that has been developed in the last 40 years is safe. And you could do the same thing with any number of drugs. So I guess the point there is that, you know, they say, well, it'll be less safe. Then what has been the percentage of drugs that have been pulled off the market by the FDA on average since 1960? 2%. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. I mean, Janet Woodcock's very proud of it, which is that we have more drugs in the market, and our safety record is still. So the idea that somehow we're throwing people to the wolves or the predators is incorrect as well.
And to Bob's point, FDA, I think Paul can allude to this as well, FDA on their own end has pushed very hard to internationalize their operations.
Yes.
At this point. If you look at all federal regulatory agencies, there are probably few, if any, federal regulatory agencies that have as many international operations as the FDA has done at this point.
The biggest FDA's headache is probably the seafood that's coming in from South America, or the burrito in Chipotle.
Yeah.
Or the generics from India.
Or the generic ingredients from India. But Bob made a great point earlier about, look, the future is database-driven medicine, because we increasingly know that there is really no such thing as diabetes, one disease, or breast cancer, one disease. It's 10 diseases. It's going to be different dysfunctions that have the same clinical symptoms, but are going to need radically different treatments. So there's a great group out in California called the Cancer Commons, and William Wong and Jeff Schrager there wrote a great article there that basically said, look, we don't have enough patients to put into clinical trials to test all the combinations we're going to need to beat cancer. We cannot continue to do randomized clinical trials because literally we don't have enough time or enough money to use the traditional system.
So how about Cancer Moonshot 2020? Like, where does that fit into this conversation?
Well, I know a little bit about that because, full disclosure, I've done some work for Celgene, and I know. So Cancer 2020 was something that Patrick Shushing dreamed up while at JP Morgan almost, and if it comes to pass, what it will do is it's looking only at immunotherapies, these new checkpoint inhibitors. And everybody is going to supposedly put their checkpoint inhibitors into the pot. They'll do point of care genomic sequencing, which I can talk about later. It won't be, it's not really that instructional in large part because the genomics of a tumor do not correlate with what happens at the immune level. But be it as it may, all this stuff, people will be able to be treated in combinations at point of care.
Right.
And
but that's also big data driven, right?
it is big data driven,
Yeah.
yes. And I don't know
So
if
this is moving towards
Yes,
what you're
yeah.
advocating, right? This is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I blogged a little. I mean, it was a little bit over the top. I said this is the most important scientific policy decision in human history. And why did I say that? Because it was the first time that you had everybody on the same page saying, we're not doing randomized trials. We're putting everything in the bucket and we're going to do it this way. And even if it doesn't come to pass, it's changed the conversation. There was also a very good op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about it by your colleague Tom Coburn.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Where the real choke point, if you will, sometimes isn't the FDA, it's the insurance companies. They don't want to pay for these combinations. And in any event, let me just say one other thing about Cancer Commons. So I co-founded a group called Transforming Medicine, the Elizabeth Kaufman Institute. It was founded by Stuart Kaufman, who lost his wife to pancreatic cancer, who is really the founder of computational biology, systems biology. Lee Hood, who's developed systems biology, who was a friend of Stu's. My friend Kathleen O'Connell, who lost her son to brain cancer. And Colin Hill, who runs GNS Healthcare, which is a probably the cutting-edge big data company in healthcare, who had his father was diagnosed with colon cancer. He lost his cousin to ovarian cancer. We thought, standard of care is failing everybody. So why don't we use these big data techniques and use machine learning to develop predictive models that can be used to guide treatment. And you think, well, do you trust a machine? I certainly do. GNS has been doing stratification for drug companies and finding mutations that are actionable that the companies in 20 years didn't discover.
This is interesting because on the property and casualty side of insurance, this is commercial
Yeah.
business insurance, we've been using predictive modeling for everything.
Yeah.
And in fact, it almost sort of damages the entire idea of insurance that you can predict individual risk, right? But on the health side, I'm not saying that, I'm
it's
being
funny.
experimental, I'm being definitions.
So
It's funny because there's a legal challenge here and there's also a sort of societal challenge. I know, having been a P&C lawyer myself, it's funny because you'll get, for someone who wants a discount in car insurance, we're pretty successful. Most folks in the 21st century are pretty successful. Pick up the phone, call the insured and say, we want you to install telemetric equipment into your car.
Which I did.
And what telemetric equipment
I did not get a discount.
That would be
Quite the opposite.
But we'll get folks who'll routinely consent. We'd like to put a device into your car. It can't raise your rates legally, but it can lower your rates. Let's put a telemetric device into your car that measures your driving habits. Progressive, for example, has been very successful.
I have a progressive.
And the challenge I think we see, and I think Jim can speak to this in the construction of the registry, that this, if you really want to see this research progress, I think you almost have to be for open sourcing of your medical data at this point. You have to be able to give out your medical data to anybody, anywhere, at any time, who can theoretically help. And the legal challenge to this is sort of HIPAA and the privacy culture that we've built up here, where you get a lot of knee-jerk reactions. I know that Jim has seen a few on the registry that you explain to people the challenge they face and the challenges they face in terms of their active
But we
medical
have the
conditions.
technology for de-identified data. There are companies that just do that all day
Yeah,
long.
we have the technology, but I think the one other thing we have to respect, I practice cybersecurity law on a daily basis, and trust is a challenge from the standpoint if the federal government can't even protect their own data, you have to build up trust, and you have to also build up risk appetite in people to say, hey, can we make the risk of your data breach ever be zero? No, we can't. Unfortunately, we can't. But by the same token, if you're dealing with the largest single minority in the United States, which is everybody, basically. Everybody, the insurance world tells me, everybody is going to come down with chronic illness at some point in their lives. For some people, it's going to last 5 minutes. For other people, it's going to last 50 years, basically. The only way we're going to solve this problem is if you tell, for example, to your point, you go for your routine physical, here's a routine blood test. If you don't want to know the answer to this, this is fine. But this very well may tell us as to whether or not, this blood test, if you have markers for brain cancer, colon cancer, other stuff like that. We're dealing with, right before I came here, we had an issue with a friend, national blood drive right now for an individual who unfortunately is suffering from stage 4 leukemia, the Catcher family. They're essentially telling the world, we need your blood samples to find that one person who has bone marrow. And I even have family members who are like this, though, who are like, they know the need for this stuff, basically. They know it's there, and it's getting over that one final hurdle that we can de-identify data, but particularly from the older generations, when you then see the opposite headlines of, oh, your target credit card information has been spread out to 10 million people. I live in the world that, as a lawyer in this area, I assume that my data has been breached 10 different times, And my security doesn't come from the Microsoft Security Essential software I have on my computer. It's that everybody's security has been breached at this point. And if you pick me out of 250 million people, congratulations,
Yeah.
all power to you.
Wait, look, there's people that won't use E-ZPass. Now, what's that about, right? And it's really like, oh, I don't want the government getting my information. Dude, they have your driver's license. But it's that whole thing. With respect to earning trust, and I think this is why the right to try has been so successful, is because you're not asking people to give their data and then maybe 10 years down the road we'll come up with something. No, it's like you give us your data and we'll do something that's actionable to you, that can help you or help others that you know. That's really the I think
The killer app for healthcare is customization. It exists in every other part of our economy, where the consumer gets to tailor the services that they bring to you, and it's just-in-time manufacturing of personalized goods and services that are built around what you want and what you need. Medicine has to get there, and that's going to be
And I think we also need that for, like, given society. I mean, what do we have, like 15% mixed race couples now, young people getting married, and their offspring. I mean, the old categories in race is almost like a political choice as opposed to a reality, right?
right.
I'm in a mixed marriage, and my wife is a Democrat.
Mike, see,
And by the way, I'm transitioning to a teenager. Just so
let's throw a question to you if you think it's worthwhile to discuss it. The way we finally got rid of the Interstate Commerce Commission, which was a very big lot on the discussions here, we found a single rule that we gave them. We were looking for it for a couple of years with one of the high-powered companies. We found a single rule. We finally figured out what it was. We had one single rule to obey. And we had the FCC pass it. No, I'm sorry. It was it was not the FCC. It was anyway. It was
ICC, right?
no, it was the Fair Trade Commission.
Fair trade.
So we had the Fair Trade Commission pass it, and they didn't know what hit it. Now, to me, I think the problem I see is we've got lots of churning around here. You know, a lot of very bright people. You know, there are a lot of Priestley's and Lavoisiers out here. All of whom know the right answer. The question is, how do we get there? What I think we need, and I'm going to suggest this, is my own plan is, I think if we can get the FDA to change their target, say, what is your reason for existence? If we can get Congress to say to them, you are no longer taxed with all this stuff came up in 1960 and thalidomide and Tuskegee and all this other crap. But we're going to give you a very simple rule to follow. If you do that, I think the whole thing collapses. The simple rule is, the purpose of clinical trials is to save as many people's lives as quickly as possible. No one should ever be given a placebo. No information should ever be withheld. And if you get those, or your own words, I think if you can get Congress to tell the FDA that, I think you can rid them without having to go through, you know, I've talked to John Goodman and Vince Galbiani and Bart and all those guys on Right to Try 3 years ago. They asked me to come down and critique them because I had some experience writing legislation through Congress for a couple of years. It was back in maybe Lincoln's day, but still. So, and the thing that I thought you'd look for is you'd like to find one little lever. Just get that lever. Not have to convince everybody. Don't fight them on the, well, I've got this guy in Topeka. You'll lose that every time. Just say, all right, well, look, how about this rule? Cure as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. That's the right thing to do. You get that there may be some, you know, variation of immune cover. But something like that, I think, once you do that, you just make them start thinking about this. Is what I'm doing here is I'm curing people, or am I going to make them wait 10 years to cure?
And to your point, I think there are two versions of safety that the FDA needs to address, in which, to me, the version of safety that you really need the FDA for would be best exemplified. There was the issue with the Massachusetts compounding drugs, the steroids that they were manufacturing, which were contaminated by a fungus. And no patient would have a way of not knowing that. There was drugs, Bob, what were they, do you remember what they were being given for, the types of procedures that they were, I believe it was for pain medication.
Pain medications.
Yeah, pain medications. And the compounding pharmacy accidentally contaminated these medications with a fungus. In a situation like that, that's the purest reason
Sure.
for the FDA to
Sure.
be here. For those of you that are not familiar with the history, the whole foundation of the FDA is based on what's called the Pure Food and Drug Act. That basically was to deal with the issues in the early part of the 20th century where folks were giving out things like arsenic and lead and calling them medication, things that are occasionally found in Michigan's water supply, unfortunately, at this point.
No snake oil.
No snake oil at this point. And from a safety standpoint, that was the original reason for the FDA to be there. We don't want to have contaminated substances. And to that point, remarkably, two areas that the FDA doesn't regulate at all that our patients end up having to take because we don't have the 15-year study drugs. FDA doesn't get involved in the study and review at all of the safety of homeopathic medicines. And they don't get involved in the safety and the review of dietary supplements at this point. And I would say even the review of a few medical procedures. So for
A
example,
lot of surgeries are not subject, no surgery is subject to
well,
that.
and then to your point, there's ironically a reason when we started G-PACT that there's a hyphen in G-PACT's web address. And why is that? Remarkably, there's a closely related organization that is not ours, that you can look up, that is at gpact.org, no hyphen, that is the lead authority in the U.S. that's trying to push colonic hydrotherapy, basically. And that is completely regulated by the FDA. And if there was a way, to your point, FDA is properly there to make sure that someone didn't contaminate a drug manufacturing plant with impure substances. That's why Pure Food and Drug Act is there at this point. The question becomes, and I've thought of this from time to time, be curious, NIH, I've gotten to know Chris Austin well at NCATS and NIH, and he's really become a champion of efficacy in clinical trials. Is there a way for NIH or NCATS or some either new federal organization or some new semi-private organization to take on and bring nuance to sort of the non-pure Food and Drug Act nuance sort of safety and efficacy?
The NIH is the last place you want to go.
Okay.
I don't know if I won't quote the name of the FDA official, but she said the NIH scientist couldn't open up a walnut if they had instructions. Because they're very good at giving out grants and doing basic research, but when it comes to medicinal chemistry, clinical pharmacology, designing clinical trials, even handling biosamples, they're horrible. You don't want the NIH involved. The NIH almost screwed up the Ebola trials because they insisted they wanted randomization in a
And the Ebola vaccine.
random. So, I don't think that we'll see if they,
Sierra Leone and just.
yeah, exactly, because Sierra Leone is, state of the art. No, I think going back to Paul's point, you've got 11,000 members, and we could sequence everybody's genome for $1,000. We could go to Human Longevity, pick up the phone, call Bob Harari, let's just do it. And then look at the microbiome, which they're also doing. And then let's hand it over to, we'll do it through transform medicine. Let's do a deep dive of what's going on in everybody's gut. And I'll tell you something else. You'll probably find out that there's certain targets or ways to treat these things that, for example, has anyone tried central vagus nerve stimulation?
We have thought of that. That's
So-
worked in some patients.
Well, here's the So a friend of mine runs a company called Electrocore, and it's a non-invasive vagus nerve stimulator. And there's a lot of people who are using his device to take care of their epileptic dogs. So I'm thinking to myself, I said, well, I have a friend of mine who's got dystonia in the neck, she has Parkinson's. How do I get it to her? Because it's not approved for the FDA. Says, well, you should, if their dog has epilepsy, I could send you a device. And I'm going, what is it? So their dog Charlie is now can use the device for this poor dog's epilepsy, and it's gotten better. So, but I guess the point being that, once these targets become manifest, I bet you there are things that are on the market today, there are compounds that are that using combination can treat it. There's data that we can look. There are any number of drugs now for Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, that may be actionable, but we just don't know enough about the biology of the individual gut. But we can get there a lot faster than asking the NIH to hold to do an expert panel on gastroenterology and doing meta-analysis of all the data. Screw that. I mean, everyone just spit into a cup. I'll take it home today.
Well, what Cornell has started specializing in actually is the viewpoint now is we're dealing with what are at the end of the day peripheral small fiber neuropathies, and they've begun specializing. It used to be the gold standard back in the 90s. You would do a full thickness biopsy of the small intestine and large intestine, and then that's essentially a doorway to peritonitis, basically. You have newer technology in the form of a skin punch biopsy, basically, where you essentially take a hole punch a 3-millimeter chunk of skin, send it out to a lab for about a week or so, and there are certain inflammatory properties that you might see in the skin.
And I'm going to quote Jim Pinkerton again. Remember John held a conference on closing the gap.
We co-chaired.
We co-chaired it at the Cornell Club, and Jim Pinkerton spoke. And Jim talked about the power of the artisanal cheese lobby in the FDA. So turns out that the FDA required artisanal cheesemakers to use metal trays instead of wood, which is because. So this regulation was issued. This guidance was issued. Now, who is the ranking senator from Vermont? Bernie Sanders and Patrick Leahy. Bernie Sanders and Patrick Leahy called up the FDA. And, that's where a lot of artisanal cheeses are made. They called up their colleagues in Minnesota and Wisconsin on a bipartisan basis, and within 3 days, that guidance, which took the FDA 2 years to develop, was shredded. So if the artisanal cheese lobby can prevail, there's no reason why G-PACT, with big data and genomic sequencing and can't prevail as well.
I think that you have some marching orders here, but in the interest of time, I just wanted to ask, does anyone in our audience have any questions?
I do. So the right to try, how do they determine what is terminal to the point that they can pursue this? Like both of my parents are fighting cancer, both terminal.
Yep.
What is it your parents have?
My dad has GBM and my mom has multiple myeloma.
What's she on right now?
She's on, she's getting the Zometa. She had,
Is she on Revlimid?
she's on Revlimid. She went from 70% to 5% in the time she was on, also with the belly shots, the vape.
Velcade.
She was on Velcade. She's having a lot of bad side effects.
She needs a combination. We'll talk.
Yeah.
But
What's your
also, the
GBM?
doctors won't do anything special because this is the protocol.
Right.
This is what insurance will pay for, even though they don't even want to pay for it. Dad had the radiation in his brain, which is causing other problems.
Yes.
So they're both terminal, but at what point is it the doctor that decides?
It's the doctor.
There's nothing else?
Yeah, it's the doctor. So you have to find a doctor who's willing to say, okay, these things are not working for you, Mom. Like we see this is terrible for you, she's getting sick or whatever. And then to find something that is in phase 2 or 3 that either you guys identify or the doctor does, and probably that, and then a manufacturer who's willing to provide.
But also it's quality of life, right?
Yeah.
So they gave Dad 9 months to 3 years, but, not living much of
They
a
gave
life.
my daughter 11 months. I got her in 6 compassionate care. She got 32 months. She would have had another 32 if I hadn't been so stupid in a couple of things. I've been a little smarter, but 11. But every day of life is worth fighting for. And nobody can tell you today. It's like Leon Panetta saying that this attack's going on for 7 hours. They have no idea. They're giving you a bunch of averages. Don't give up the fight. There's lots of good stuff that you can get.
When people say just a month or just a few months, our friend Peter Bach, manages nobody's average, and I know people, many people, who 20 years later, after being told they had a month to live, are still around because every time they were told, well, that's it, there was something else. We did, what?
Bob Top, you're.
No, my friend Bob Tufts, multiple myeloma survivor. I mean, if he had been in England, he'd be dead because Revlimid wasn't considered to be cost effective. But to the point, the faster we can move this cycle forward, you know, the longer more people will live.
So in your case, I would say obviously talk to Bob because he knows all about what's cutting edge. Secondly, if you find a doctor who wants to try something that's phase 2 or 3 and you reach out to us, we'll help you through the legal so that you can make sure like they're protected, you're protected, everybody's protected because that's a big deal. And the third option that we really haven't talked much about is to look to Europe. There's quite a bit there. There's a really good company. I don't know if you know them, My Tomorrows.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
They are awesome. It's just mytomorrows.com. The founder lost his dad, even though he was running like a huge company. It's like, this is ridiculous that I couldn't get access to this drug.
Yeah.
My Tomorrows basically specializes in finding anything. They have a lot of special patients with like small, like orphan diseases and stuff, but anything that's cutting edge. And in Europe, compassionate use is more widespread, so they're matching the new products with the people who desperately need them, and they'll send you new alerts. So if you say, like you sign up and say like, mom's got this kind of myeloma, they will send you alerts anytime there's something new, and you can possibly get care there too. So, and they may not have anything, but 30% of the the newest advances are coming out of Europe, so they might.
Darcy, following up on that point, do you think in your view, from a geographic legal standpoint, is Europe doing this better, is Japan doing this better, is Canada doing this better? What do you see comparatively?
Well, these guys can speak to getting things through the pipeline first. I mean, my understanding is they get a lot through. Sometimes we're faster, sometimes they're faster. They're far better at compassionate use than we are. I mean, it's pretty widespread, and most of the insurers will cover your care. And you know, we're not. I mean, that's like a 25-year-old system, so we're not remotely there. I know a lot of people who are in dire circumstances, but they are. If you can get there.
And in Europe, is that union-wide or any particular country?
Every country is a little bit different, and that's the benefit of My Tomorrows is they know the regulations in each place and what will apply to you, what won't, and so forth. But it's not. It's certainly not homogeneous, but it's close enough.
The general rule for the European Union, which is stated and written, like Rule 16 or something, is that member countries are urged to be particularly generous and open to treatments for people who have deadly diseases. And so it's much easier. I did a lot of work for Northwest Bio, and we had to go to Europe to get some things done because it was just too hard. Because the minute we go in, they kept doing when I was working, they said, we are working. But they got a $5 million grant from the German government to accelerate. So, but it's much easier doing clinical trials.
Right.
So.
There's in Germany, there's Dominic, the woman that we met from Germany, Liddy,
Belgium.
they're doing a combination of 10 different drugs for glioblastoma. Some of them are drugs, some of them are supplements, and there's sort of a whole underground of people using
We had 3 survivors.
Yeah.
Who were given less than a year to live, they're all still here, 10, 15 years old.
Yeah.
I wrote down a video you might want to look at, survivingterminalcancer.org, and it tells the story of these 3 guys who put together their own. And you can follow them up in the European Union. They have clinical trials just beginning on that particular one.
Thank you.
And Israel and Japan too are far ahead. I don't know where you begin and what the entry points are there, but they've got a lot going on too.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say,
Go ahead, Chris, yeah.
we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, we wanted to. I know that a couple of our panelists might need to head out a little bit, and I just wanted to give folks an opportunity to give some closing remarks here at this point. Start out with Paul here.
The point at which this becomes unstoppable, I think it was Bob who used the example of you jump off on a skyscraper, you survive once it's a fluke, you survive twice, maybe it's an aberration, you survive 3 times you're a pilot. And the ability for us to identify in the midst of these larger populations, you know, go ahead and run your trial. We'll take Bob's suite of proteome, microbiome, all these things, and we will identify those patients, and let's see who identifies the winners fastest. And so I think, you know, that is the future. Bayesian medicine, database-driven medicine is identifying these patients, and the magnitude of response you get in these patients. It's not like, oh, we're seeing a tiny little response. It's we're seeing a magnitude of effect. You don't see spontaneous remissions in metastatic, cancer. They are extraordinarily rare. So if you can show a cohort of these patients, say, look, they respond to this treatment, they all have these characteristics in common, then you've changed the game. Then you begin to blow up the entire RCT model.
I just don't think your group should wait another 10 years. You know, you've waited 10 years too long. And after this is over, we should talk about how to work together to get a little tail.
Act up.
Yeah.
In terms of the 21st Century Cures Act, we've been covering it for a couple of years at Biopharma Dive, and based on the conversation with all of you, it seems that the one takeaway is the current FDA and the way the system is set up is definitely grounded in a 20th century philosophy, responding to a 20th century reality. And so it's inevitable that big data will change the way things happen, but I just hope that we don't lose too many people in the meantime, because that's what's happening. Every single day we're losing people because we can't get back together. So.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that by and large, I'm in agreement with all the panels, some of the things that they've said about the FDA and the need for reform, and the elimination of phase 2 and 3. And all of those things, and what we've seen is what you've seen, which is it just takes years and years and years to try to get the FDA to make any kind of a change. And I'd love it if Bob could hatch a cheese plan for you guys and what you need. But I mean, it's been 30 years since they've had a major reform there, and that's why we designed the right to try. Where we said we've got to take a different approach. What can we do vis-a-vis the states and those constitutions to protect patients and help their rights? And so that's how it was designed, and hopefully that's just the beginning for us. Then we can, you do under the U.S. Supreme Court have a right to self-preservation. You have the right to die in hasten your own death.
They against Frank.
But that's a circuit decision, and it's not binding. It's not
The
binding.
Supreme Court said that.
It's not binding. It's not binding. And so I have a whole chapter on the legality of this, but in the book, but the point is that we do have a lot of rights, and we've been fighting this in Washington, and that's great, and that needs to continue. But I think that we're going to be able to do more to protect patients' rights using the state constitutions the way we are with right to try. So we'll try to build on this, and this is it's not everything, but it's a good beginning when you're stalled in Washington.
I went through this once and was successful. I got rid of the ICC, and I said, hi, I had Dr. John Meyer, who's head of the economics department. And John Snow, who later became Secretary of Transportation. At that time, he was the legal counsel for one of the big railroads, Jesse or something like that. We had very big hitting guys. Cal Collier was one of our groups. He became the FTC commissioner, chairman. So I'm a little bit leery. I love Galbraith and Goodman in this right to try, because I think nibble away is good. I think in the long run, it's a rear guard action by the enemy, and so
we'll race you to the finish line. I mean, I'm good with that. I mean, do everything you can in Washington, but people can't wait anymore.
Well,
That's the
I
point
feel
of
the same
right
way.
to
I
try.
think you're doing great work. I'm just saying, I was urged yesterday by Al Musel, I don't know if you know Al, said, why don't you join the right to try? I told him, I think you're doing great. I want to go to the heart of the matter, the belly of the beast, I want to kill it. Because I went through this with the ICC, and a couple of times Sheila said to me, well, you did pretty good, John, why don't you stop now? We had a lot of rules changed. I said, they'll just come back. It's like, I didn't think of it at the time. It's just like a cancer in remission, come back. So the only way to get this Secretary Schultz, I called him George once, he almost killed me. It was so many years later. The stare would have melted you, but I said, the only way we're going to get this is get rid of him forever. And if I only thought of a good way to get them all employed somehow, it would have been a lot easier.
Well, you can ask for power back, or you can take it back, and I mean, I think that that's what the states are doing, and that we are forcing the FDA's hand. I mean, last year when they came out, they said, at first they were saying, well, the compassionate use process is so easy, everybody can do it, which of course we all know is a big lie. Within a year, they came out and said, we got our first first 5 states and they said, you know what, we are gonna turn that into a 45-minute form.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a sea change
Oh,
in
you
the
guys are
FDA,
doing
and they
great.
did it, but what I'm saying is that the state work is good in its own right, but it also shames them and it
Sure.
forces their
Yeah,
hand. So
yeah.
it's important
Yeah.
that, you
And
know,
it builds
the-
legal precedent too.
it builds legal precedent,
Yeah.
and the best, you know, the best power to fight power is another power. And the states are incredibly powerful with state constitutions, so I would not underestimate our ability to
No,
force
I'm a
the
big supporter.
FDA's
I'm
hand.
one of the biggest supporters here. I love it. Keep it up. Anything I can do to help.
Well, here's the other analogy. I mean, you know, there now, you know, it was what happened at the state level that allowed people, you know, same-sex marriages. And then the Supreme Court ratified
So
it.
do you have a boyfriend in mind?
No, I don't. But, I'm just saying that in general, it's like those changes come from the states.
Well, look at
And,
medical marijuana, right?
Yeah.
20 states passed them, and then now the Obama administration isn't enforcing federal laws anymore.
Yeah.
And they, you know, when the people speak, and that's why I said to Krista, like, what patients do matters. Testifying in those state houses matters.
lot.
You know, the FDA is not deaf, and when they see 24 states pass a law in 2 years, they know change is coming.
It's a
So
political.
you have to keep up the pressure and the
Well, I
momentum.
hope you beat
we
us.
know-
I hope you beat me.
We know that right now that the FDA model is outmoded, it needs to go away. But I, like Darcy, I believe I've attacked so many things from so many angles, and if we're all working in
It's a
concert,
target-rich environment. This
Yes,
is like fight a
exactly.
I would just close with, first of all, I want to thank everybody who's come this evening. It's, you know, terrific help, and these discussions really represent a terrific new starting point, not only for us, but for other folks in the New York area who were, you know, unable to join us tonight. Tonight's presentation has, you know, been filmed, and we're going to put it up on YouTube at, you know, at this point. But, you know, I want to speak to a second, not only for the folks that are here, but, you know, for the one thing that I might agree with Donald Trump on, and that's, you know, to the silent majority, as it were, at, you know, at this point. You know, that there are a lot of folks who couldn't join us tonight due to physical constraints and whatnot, but there are other folks who wouldn't join us tonight for fear of either participating in the discussion or fear of having their voice heard, or, you know, fear that they'd be harmed in some way. And I'm a history buff by background, and you know, my dad was part of the generation, and, you know, Mr. Greenberg, who I work with, was part of the generation that, you know, fought against the Cold War. And I, you know, was a kid when the Berlin Wall came down, basically, and it took generations of folks. It took nearly, you know, took a good 25, 30 years, you know, for Spies to knock down the Berlin Wall at this point. But it had to start with a couple of bricks somewhere. And, you know, for those other patients that are out there that are afraid, for those other doctors and clinicians, we, you know, desperately need the clinicians to be part of these discussions, and we have desperate few who are part of these discussions to explain how they might put forward these protocols. This is not just a job for policymakers, but it's a job for the folks that are sitting on the ground. And if this is going to gain, you know, any power, there's going to be more voices, because, again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. This is the largest minority in the United States, and this is everybody eventually. You know, at this point, there's no bigger minority in that, and this is more than an economic issue. It really comes down to a civil rights issue at the end of the day. And I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I, you know, really appreciate your continued work.
thank you, this concludes the formal portion.
For the site.
Thank you.
And we'll
Just send in your spreadsheet.